podcast. I am your host, Shane Hazen. Coming up this week, joined once again by filmmaker Kyle Smith, but also new revolving guest host, Rehman Nizar Ali, great film editor, great friend. Hopefully this will be the first of many episodes with him on there. We're going to be discussing that eternally great Christmas movie, Eyes Wide Shut. It has a lot of Christmas lights in it, so it has that going for it. But real briefly, what I watched this week, there's inside my pandemic bubble is my dad and my stepmom are included in there, and they come over. We haven't been doing it as much lately because of the holidays, but usually like once every 2 weeks, they'll come over. And I've extolled the virtues of the Watch TCM app on here before, and I try to keep a big watch list of things that I might potentially be able to watch if I get the time. Because what will happen is my stepmom, being one of the only other people in the family who likes movies released before she was born, but also likes movies in black and white, mainly she picks it. My dad usually just uses veto power on it. And so we watched another Christmas movie this week, Christmas in Connecticut, a screwball comedy from 1945, I think, with Barbara Stanwyck and Sidney Greenstreet in it. It's Barbara Stanwyck the same year as Double Indemnity, so there's that. I always noted this movie, I thought it had some Preston Sturges background rewrite or something. I don't think it did. I mistakenly did that, but I always noted this as one of the remake of this was one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's only two directed credits. He did an episode of Tales from the Crypt, and I want to say it was a TNT made for TNT movie. But TCM was a kind of a hole this year during the pandemic, just because there was a comfort level of watching stuff on there just because it wasn't this year. I was watching a lot of old movies where it just seemed like society made more sense. The world was more organized. Adults were in charge. And I read a lot more history that way too. And I've been a little doom and gloom, not so much on here, except on the articles I've been posting on our Facebook page about the future of the film industry. And I think it should be clear, I am optimistic. I don't know what the future of the feature film format is going to be in theaters. I don't know exactly how the collective activity of going to see a movie and enjoying a movie together, it's clearly one of the things all human beings, not just myself, really hold dear, with few exceptions. There are exceptions, but we're still going to be seeing movies. Every question I have is not about the artistic process or the needs of human beings to want to tell stories and want to hear stories. That is the most fundamental. It's the way our brains work. From an evolutionary standpoint, how we tell stories is a part of is baked in our DNA because it's how we attract mates. We're always trying to figure out stories to tell each other about our experiences and figure out value. And in that regard, with the term value, we get to my only worry, which is the economics and the market. And personally, from a economic standpoint and a employment standpoint, had a pretty shitty 2020. And I don't know how 2021 is going to go in that regard. And I think I am not an isolated case. I'm just going to put that out there. But all that being said, I still believe very strongly in everything I said non-economically. Our stories are going to get better. Our stories are going to get more sophisticated. Our stories are going to be more true. And the best format to tell these stories, as much economic value needed to tell these stories, is still film, is still an audiovisual format. So I don't know what that means for us being distracted and watching shit on our phones, being having Silicon Valley just poke at our brain or lizard brains, or if that means that the 22-hour Great American streaming series that's going to unite red and blue states is on the horizon. I know that once we're all allowed to be back together, people are still going to make good art. And I just I didn't want to go out this year on a negative note. I want to go out on a make sure that it's clear that I firmly believe in the positivity of the stories we're going to be telling. So, if you're listening to this and you make film, or you want to learn more about making film, or you just want to discuss making film, I do think better days are ahead. And on that note, let's discuss Eyes Wide Shut.
I watched the movie today, which I might bring up. I might bring this movie up later.
I saw you on your letterbox. You mentioned it. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
Judix, the Georges Franju movie, and
I have no clue what this is. I just saw you mention an Eyes Wide Shut connection in it.
Yeah, it's a movie that's based on the French filmmaker Louis. I'm not gonna say his name right. Like Fuyade. I don't know. This guy in the 19 teens made 3 like 6-hour serial films. The most famous is called like Les Vampires, or like the vampires, and it is the inspiration for Irma Vep, the Ossias movie.
Okay.
And so you've seen images. What's that?
You had the mention of the 3 movies.
Yeah. So like in Irma Vep, it's all these like women in cat. In the original silent film, it's all these women in cat suits who are like stealing things. I have not seen the silent film. But I remark in my review, because I was thinking about the pandemic, how at the beginning there was this energy of like, oh, now we're like cooped up and I'm going to like watch those things I always wanted to see. And I'm going to read that, those big books that have been sitting on my shelf for years. And watching this film today, I was like, oh, now would be the great time to like watch these 6-hour silent movies. But 9 months in, I'm so exhausted that I don't really want to do that.
For next week's episode, I'm starting to line up the end of the year stuff, and it's kind of demoralizing just because, like, with the diminished quality, the end of the year stuff is just like more of a chore. All right, I wanted to start out for you guys. Kubrick being a thing for me, like I have a bunch of books to go to from this, and there's this cool book from. Where was it? I'm starting out strong. Michael Benson wrote this book called Space Odyssey that just came out 2 years ago. That is one of for me, the definitive thing on 2001. And he tells a story in the mid-'60s of Kubrick, right when he's first starting to get Arthur C. Clarke engaged in the screenplay, being based out of New York. He goes to visit Joseph Heller, the writer of Catch-22, who's a big admirer of Dr. Strangelove. And they talk to each other. And Kubrick records the conversation. And the quote that is from the book that I pulled out was, Kubrick says to Heller, the film form and its ability to generate a lot of emotions, that's what you might call the non-plot story or the anti-plot film. Once they get under your skin, you're vibrated by the subtlest kind of vibration. It works especially in films, but it works in books too. And this is Kubrick in 1964, and I feel like every movie he made after that point had a certain level of was hypnotic, and may have been like very thin on plot or very thin on purpose, not doing much. So my last watching of Eyes Wide Shut, it really felt that like it was like there's not much going on in this movie, but it's very Kubrick movies are hypnotic, and you're going to watch whatever he does.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that was on my mind watching this movie again was how Okay, so in another scale of things, when he gives that quote, 1964, Kubrick has made what, 4 or 5 movies in about an 8-year period.
Yeah, his pace was obviously
His
different than what
pace
it
is,
ended up being.
and it's very high quality films he's making. And then there is this 7-year gap between The Shining and Eyes Wide Shut, or Full Metal Jacket, and then there's a 12-year gap between Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, and then this is the last film he makes. So for me, there was like the distance um, of how long he marinated on this project carries with it like this. When you watch Eyes Wide Shut, and I saw it in theaters when it came out, like opening weekend, and being like, whoa, this is the man's final words. This is this guy who was so obsessive. And then he made this movie. And I think when I saw it at the time and I was 15, I didn't understand a lot of what was going on. It also felt like kind of like slapdash and a little, I think in a way, lazy to me. And then watching it again, I've seen it a couple times since then, and each time fell more into the spell. And then watching the other night, I was completely hypnotized by it. And wondering if like the distance I now had from the movie, plus the age I've attained at that time, as well as the life experience, makes it more that way.
Let's go ahead. Raymond, start with you. When did you first see this movie?
I probably saw it pretty soon after I saw my first Kubrick movie, which would have been in high school, and that was A Clockwork Orange. And I loved Clockwork Orange in high school.
What was the time frame of this?
Between Clockwork Orange and so high school, it was probably 2004, 2003, 2005, somewhere around there.
Okay,
is when I saw the first movie, my first Kubrick film, which was that, and it's still my favorite, probably because of its sort of like connection that I have. But this was a time where that's when I really started watching movies, and that was one of the first ones that really kind of got me away from just what you saw at the multiplex, I guess. And then so that was the most recent one. So I think that's how I got Eyes Wide Shut. And I will definitely confess, I thought it was interesting. I remember my thoughts at that time were it's interesting and different, because I didn't have like the idea of what it was, and I don't think I liked it very much, because for me at that time, Clockwork Orange was just so visceral.
Comparing that to Clockwork Orange, just on a violent sex level alone, or
the sort of transgressive nature of Clockwork Orange really got me. This one was interesting. Transgressive for me is like the nudity and how it felt. The nudity in this movie, and it kind of felt quote unquote refined.
They're connected though in the fact that these are the most sexual Kubrick movies, though.
Yeah.
And these are the movies that touched up against the X or NC-17 rating too.
These two, and I would throw Lolita in there as well.
Well, I wouldn't, because Lolita's so tame. Lolita is so verbal and like jokey and punny and literate, but like it was hamstrung by the time, so it doesn't feel like a I say this, Lolita is one of the weakest Kubrick movies for me. And I keep coming back to it. I literally rewatched Lolita this year after finally. I read like the first half of Lolita in high school, never finished it, and I read it this year, finally finished it, and watched the movie after reading it, and still, every time it's one of those movies I keep coming back to. I want to like it, I want to understand it more, and it still is the weakest Kubrick movie. For me.
I think that might hold up, but I remember feeling, maybe it's because similar to you, I read the book and then I watched the movie the last time I watched it, and I probably carried with me some of the book stuff into the film.
I think carrying the book helps the movie.
It does. But I think that's why I'm thinking of it as sexy. I mean, I'm not going to argue that it's more sexy or sex-driven than the two films we're discussing, but I just wanted to throw it in the conversation.
I don't think the Adrian Lyne version is that bad, from what I remember, too.
Mm-hmm. No, it's not. It's an Angelica Houston, I think, is in it.
I haven't seen that.
It's Jeremy Irons and Dominique Swan. And,
yeah.
So Kyle, what was your first viewing of this? You said it was you watched it opening weekend?
Yeah, so I'm I'll be 37 next week, so I'm maybe a little older than you guys. And
me, Kyle.
Not you. Me. I knew Kubrick. At that point, I'd probably seen about half of his films. And that was the year I got into movies. That 1999 is all these great films come out. But
that was the year you got into movies. You picked a good year to get into movies.
Well, I think 98 actually is when I got into movies. So it was like I was fully prepared for what 99 had to offer. And yeah, I went and saw this at the multiplex down the street from my parents' house and in Missouri. I was looking this up. This opened at number 1, the box office, made $21 million. It unseated American Pie. So American Pie was number 1 the week before, and then this was number 1 the week after. Which there's some think piece to be written about that, but also
okay. So my story is I was working at the theater, and this was the first few weeks that I had gotten promoted to projectionist, and so I was there when American Pie had opened. I want to say it was my second summer working in the theater, and Eyes Wide Shut. Okay, so in the 35 days. In the multiplex era, they used what's called a platform system, where they would they would send you the reels, and you would tape the reels together, and you would put on these flat discs, these platform discs. And so you basically only had to thread the film once to run it through, and it wouldn't collect on another disc. They'd have 3 discs on top of each other. And whenever you would say you'd have your biggest theater, you'd open your movie that's going to open at number 1 in your biggest theater, and over the course of the run, you'd go to smaller and smaller theaters. You'd have to move the movie. And you wouldn't want to like tear it down that way. So what you would do is you'd have different ways of moving it. And this was the first movie I moved. And what you do is you'd have this like donut that you'd slide the print under, and the print's like about 60 pounds. And over the course of my projectionist career, I dropped a print 5 times, and every time it's about a 6 to 12 hour thing of fixing the drop print, just because.
Wow.
It's a spindle of days worth of film, or not days worth of film, but thousands and thousands of feet of film that will get tangled up, and then you have to put together again. And that was the first. Eyes Wide Shut was the first movie I moved from. I remember moving it from downstairs to upstairs, and it was a big deal. I saw it the Saturday it came out. I didn't see it Friday night. I saw it the Saturday it came out. I remember, for me, it was. I mean, I was obsessive leading up to it. I remember the teaser premiering like 4 months after the Phantom Menace teaser premiered on Entertainment Tonight, and there's a disconnect between the Phantom Menace trailer and the Eyes Wide Shut one, which is it's like 6 shots and title cards, but at the same time you think Kubrick's a genius. This is the guy that came up with the trailer for Doctor Strangelove. Like, he knows how to sell a movie, and then you get this guy like, no, he doesn't understand the culture anymore. But
what? And he died that year, right? He dies early 1999.
Yeah, and he died in March. We'll get into this later, but he died. He had sent his editor to show Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman and the 2 main WB or Warner Brothers executives. Terry Semmel and the big one that had been through the 70s that had always been his angel executive. I can't remember his name. And he died just a few days later, which we'll go into that later. But yeah, he died in like before he had finished the mix. Basically, they still had looping too.
And some of the voiceover wasn't done right, like for the orgy scene.
Well, there was I don't ever have any specifics of mention of what wasn't done.
Because I remember Kate Blanchett's voice is the main woman, or at some point was going to be.
I have heard that.
Yeah, and that was done after he passed away, and apparently Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman are the ones that suggested her.
Well, there's a lot of. Have you guys seen the documentary with Leon Vitali, Filmmaker?
No, not
yet. There's a lot in there about. He was already a trusted guy of Kubrick, and Kubrick weirdly wasn't highly technical in the post-production process. Like, he mixed every movie except 2001, I think, is only in mono, and 2001's only in stereo. And Vitali was his go-to when it came to coloring. So he was the guy that oversaw, he knew what Kubrick wanted, and he would oversee the prints after Kubrick would dictate what he wanted it to color like. So, where where does this movie rank for you guys now in Kubrick's in filmography?
It's funny because right after I watched it, I was asking that to myself because this viewing was definitely the best it's ever felt to me too.
How many times have you seen it now?
This is probably my fourth time.
So you've given all three of us have really given this movie the yeoman's effort.
This is my, I think, fourth or maybe fifth, but I think it's definitely my fourth time seeing it.
And it's been a while since the last one, and I think, what's interesting is that when I first watched it, someone told me it's a movie about a marriage, right? Is that kind of how I was told? And I didn't feel it then. It didn't feel like it was really about a marriage. I think a marriage was involved. And every time I've kind of tried to approach it from that point of view, and it still to this day does not feel it's really about a marriage. A marriage is involved, right?
Really?
Yeah. To me,
why is that?
It more feels like it doesn't have to be specifically a marriage. It's just the sort of like facades and relationships between people. These two happen to be married, right?
Okay.
But and I think I've always felt that because for all viewings except this one, it's been a while since my last one. I've never really in a relationship, like a romantic one, for an extended period of time. This is the first time that I've watched it since I've had a long-term relationship.
And this changed things.
It did. I still don't think it's necessarily about the marriage, and I think that's from the first parts. But I think the sort of interactions between Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise in the movie were completely different to me than they were in the past three viewings. And especially,
do you feel the same? Kyle, do you feel the same?
Oh yeah. I watched this with my long-term partner and felt things I had nenever felt before. Again, being a film nut and seeing this at 15 and being like, whoa, we could talk about this too maybe later when I have some questions about the projection of the film, but Rehman, you probably know this, when the film came out, they put these digital bodies in front of the orgy, so by
the way, this viewing I had was the first time I saw it without those.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've had the European Blu-ray, and like I feel like I've watched it before, but I don't know what happened to my old glorious full frame DVD. But
there's got to be a whole section later about aspect ratios. But I felt like this time I watched it again about 5 or 6 years ago. I got the Kubrick Warner Brothers box set, which is every film except for Paths of Glory and The Killing and Fear and Desire. So it's every film he made. Starting with
it has Spartacus in it too.
It has Spartacus, yeah. It has Spartacus in it.
Cool.
So it's all on Blu-ray. So I'd watched that when I got it about 5 or 6 years ago, and then watched it again with my partner. And I was, I am the age that Tom Cruise is in the film. Like when he makes the film.
Holy shit!
He's 37,
Jesus.
I think, when he makes that movie.
That's kind of blows my mind because we both saw this as teenagers.
Yeah, so he is now the age I am, and sorry, this isn't all that interesting to the normal listener, but I think what the movie is complex enough is that it puts you, it asks that of you, like, how are you feeling about what's going on in this film? I always thought this way about, like, I'm not a huge Fellini fan, but I had a formative person in my life. Somebody that 8.5 was a movie that will change every 5 years. If you watch 8.5, every 5 years of your life, it'll be a different movie.
Okay.
And it's hard to understand what the effort is that makes a movie that way, but Eyes Wide Shut felt that way to me. It was like, oh, he's going through these issues of jealousy. And like, I feel in many ways, like in my life, I've moved past these questions of jealousy. But I have experienced them before and I know what they are. And I definitely know Tom Cruise's like search for an adventure and for something new and, just for a spark. And I also know the feeling he's having, which so much of the film is about, of being not part of something, being a successful doctor, but not being allowed into the parts of society that he wishes to be in. And like,
is that a universal feeling?
I don't know. I mean, that's not something I feel that. I mean, especially in the pandemic, I felt that very little because there's no places I want to be
right now. Yeah,
but like,
who's doing orgies right now?
Exactly. I'm
Zoom
sure
orgies.
someone is doing. So I agree with Rehman. Like I was really I felt emotionally. I think Kubrick's not someone I think of as an emotional filmmaker. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. He's not someone.
Yeah. There's the really cool. I don't remember if it's in the Kubrick documentary or on the DVD of this, but there's that great defense Spielberg gives of Kubrick as an emotional filmmaker, because people always say Kubrick's cold, and Kubrick or Spielberg immediately demonstrates. Well, take the Ends of Paths of Glory, which is the scene which Kubrick met his wife, which this movie is pretty much dedicated to, much less about. So,
this is definitely his most emotional to me. Most about people, like really digging into like the feelings and sort of maybe mental states, but emotional mental states the most out of anything I've seen. The others feel more psychological, or like sort of like they're like, you're there's a subject and you're trying to get the information out of, and this one is more like you kind of feel what they're feeling.
One thing this viewing really hit me is this did hit me the very first viewing because Eyes Wide Shut. My first viewing, I remember thinking the expectation was pretty strong, and it didn't feel that edgy of a Kubrick movie until the last line, which I think the last line itself is the only is in addition to the actual the dream novel story that adapted from. But I do, from the very first screen, the one sequence that I still think is like the best dramatic dialogue scene, if not since Paths of Glory, but of Kubrick's entire career, is the bedroom argument at the beginning of the movie, the stoned bedroom argument. Because the thing is, like, Kubrick's done some great dialogue scenes, but they're always funny, or they have this edge of irony, or people say absurd things. But to have a dialogue scene that edgy, or that just like sharp and prickly, like it is the thing that sets the whole story going too.
Yeah. Does that remind, every time I see that, it makes me think of Persona?
Really? Okay.
I can see that, the staging.
Yeah, with B.B. Anderson telling the story about to Liv Ullmann. And it's funny because like so much of in Persona, it's played on Liv Ullmann's face. And I think that like, I mean, that scene in Persona is probably one of the most erotic things in a film I've ever seen. Even more so than seeing something. And
sure.
Yeah, and so in that scene, I agree with you. I think it definitely sets off the movie, and it's very different from, like, it's such a intimate moment between two people. And but one thing I always wish about it, when I watch that scene, is I wish there was more on Tom Cruise.
There's a certain level of artificiality that's always been with Kubrick, or an artifice that's supposed to be methodical and like hypnotic, but you could also say is just rote acting. But because what always offsets that to me, though, and I was going to point this out to you, and I want to ask you guys about this, is for Kubrick being such a giant perfectionist, the one shot in that scene that always is the scene you clear, like the perfectionist had to keep, is that scene where he has the cheesy line where he's like, "I believe in you," and they cut to her laughing, and she doubles over twice. And the second time, they're clearly not anticipating it, so the camera has to dip down again, and it is not a smooth move. It is a very jerky move. Mm-hmm. But you clear that scene is so edgy and prickly that they had to keep that shot in. That one take they had to keep in.
Yeah, it almost feels like, I don't know if it was, but I almost felt like there was a little bit of a zoom in it or something. Like, I don't know if they were on a zoom lens, but it kind of felt like that.
It's so sharp. It's so it's so. I in that Space Odyssey book, there's this description of when the shot of the bone in 2001, whenever it cuts to the satellite, all the cameraman Kubrick had on set, how close they were in throwing the bone in the air, no one could get the shot until finally Kubrick took the camera, and he was the only one that got the shot. He ended up, and it's two shots in the movie, but he was the one that got the shot in there.
It's interesting to hear you guys. I'm sorry. Both of you as professional editors talk about that sequence, which obviously reflects some of our former boss's work in some regard. in terms of what you like, I just loved hearing you just say like I wanted more of Tom Cruise, because you said that, I'm like, oh, I didn't even think that. I was so into the like the feeling and that shot's very alive on Nicole Kidman. And my sort of larger take on the movie is that I think that opening sets you up for. I think of this as a looser Kubrick, like it's almost like his mumblecore movie in some regard.
Yeah, no,
like
I totally see it.
But there's a construct going on throughout the rest of the movie that is deeply felt throughout the production design, the shot selection, the editing, the casting. This movie is as put together as Clockwork Orange or The Shining or any of his like, clockwork masterpieces. But because of this emotional content at the beginning of the film and a little bit at the end, mostly from Kidman, I think, because she's barely in the movie when you break it down. She's only in about...
Yeah, but she's still the movie's MVP too.
Yes, yeah. Completely. So I like love that sequence, but I loved hearing you just say like I wanted Tom Cruise. It was like an editorial comment that I hadn't heard in a long time.
One cool thing I find about watching this movie now as opposed to watching this in '99 was the big deal was this was the longest Kubrick had spent on a movie. Everyone was waiting for the next Kubrick movie. They waited so long for this Kubrick movie. Kubrick died, and at the same time, when you see this movie, you're underwhelmed because it's a very simple movie. Like. A few years ago, I had a mutual friend we used to work with complain about TV lighting in the movie, the blue lighting, mainly on the exteriors in this, but it was, and I didn't disagree with him. I just thought it was irrelevant. But this movie's so, well, okay. One of the fascinating things I wanted to bring up to you guys is the apartment that they're in New York. I can't remember where I heard this from, but apparently people who knew Kubrick and his wife Christiane in the 60s and their children say that the apartment is designed from their actual apartment that they had on, it was like Lexington and 84th on the east side in Manhattan. And this is the apartment they were living in before Kubrick finally gave up on America and moved to England. The paintings on the wall are Christiane's paintings. She was an accomplished painter, and they are actually in the movie. So that adds into the personal nature of the movie, the emotional nature of the movie. Like, this movie does feel like a guy at the end of his life from a happy marriage who probably had a lot of sexual opportunity, being like, looking back on what my marriage means too, and how
do you think the movie's hopeful
about marriage or what?
Marriage, or just in general? Do you think it's
in the Kubrickian fashion, because the last line is so like, what does it make a marriage last? It's one word,
Yeah. Also, we should be grateful for the dreams and or our adventures real.
Yeah, because the whole movie is about your sexual identity is going to go on whether you wanted to or not, whether you a beautiful actress you work with comes by you, or you go to sleep and you dream. It's going to keep going. There's a quote Kubrick has about the movie where when they were first writing it, they were talking about how much of the movie is going to be a dream or not. And Kubrick flat out says, if there's no reality, there's no movie. So I put this to your big film brains. Where is the dream in the movie? When does it start? Is it that literal, or is it not literal? Is it something that comes and goes?
I don't think most of what he experienced. I don't think it's literal. I don't think there's like a clear line. This is in a dream and this part isn't. It's all absurd and surreal, and it gets more and more until he gets to the ritual. And I think the movie
is the ritual literal, or
yeah. Well, I think it's. I don't think it's really meant. Like, I don't think you can really say definitively one way or the other, because I think maybe a couple of watches ago, there's that theory that everything after the Nicole Kidman scene is a dream, but there's plenty of evidence otherwise. I kind of vaguely
thought even the stoned itself, like before the start of it was, but I mean, I also think that a literal interpretation isn't going to serve anybody too. So I find what you're saying interesting.
Yeah, I think it's like so, and this may be because this thing is written in the book, the dream novel was written in 1926 Vienna, right? So that's
Right.
very like you can get a lot of like the sort of subconscious elements to it. So I think like it is absolutely probably things that happened. Maybe the way we're seeing them is more a slow dive into his subconscious, because his encounters progressively get more and more absurd and surreal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I think like it's probably everything that happened, but maybe the way we're seeing it is a subconscious. His subconscious is like retelling of it to himself, maybe. But I don't think anything that happens is entirely in his head, and I think the line between it is very intentionally blurred, like
Okay.
very much, very intent. Yeah, and I think because like his wife gets a dream, an actual dream, right at
That
the
he
end.
witnesses, yeah, and
Yeah.
he keeps coming back to and seeing the dream over and over. And there's the weirdness of like the fight happens, she provokes him, picks a fight, and then he has to go, and then she comes back, or he comes back, and she has another dream that's a very provocative dream to tell him about, to make him not in a good state. And from a relationship standpoint, it's not the best way of handling things, like two picking up fights in a row within, in the chronology supposedly of the movie, within like what, 6 hours, 5 hours of each other.
Yeah, that's true. That's when he comes back the first night.
I agree with you, Rehman. I am sort of, and I didn't share this with you, Rehman, so I apologize, but I am sort of hopelessly lost in this document, I guess website document that I sent Shane, that is an examination of the
This is
films,
fascinating too, by the way.
the film's New York locations. And there's a way to go into deep detail, and I'll send it to you, or we'll post it in the link, whatever. But basically, this is all, I'd never realized, even as a filmmaker or as someone who pretends to know about movies, I don't think I ever quite caught that this is all shot on sets. I think if I had watched it now, I might have caught that it was on sets, because I know New York a little more and I could sort of see the way it is. But there's a phoniness to all of the exteriors in the movie that are presented and sort of a
I remember
real.
that was a Scorsese critique at the time, and it wasn't a critique; he was more a defense. He was defending everyone else's critique.
I could see, yeah, and I just couldn't see that in 1989.
I think the familiarity with New York, because I was nowhere near New York at the time.
Well, and he tricks you because he does use real exteriors of New York, and then he cuts.
Oh, yeah.
He does a classic movie trick, and then he cuts in. But a lot of the gist of this document, this webpage, is showing how the locations are physically changing, and like the businesses he frequents, like, which he weirdly goes to a lot of places. There's the cleaner, there's the costume shop, there's these bars, there's the coffee shop. They're sort of changing on the same like T intersection in Pinewood Studios, and I think that that like element of the movie all of a sudden made it feel very slippery to me, and that came after I watched it. So,
well, I remember what I found fascinating about the link was it's a very Room 237 take on it, just because it's a very basic. Because I think that link points out, like, you could say this is just basically a production design mistake, and like the geography of a set, like in Room 237, where a window is supposed to be, there's clearly going to be a wall once you actually lay it out. But when you watch it on film, people argue that that's supposed to add to the surreality and the fakeness and the dreamlike feeling of everything too. Once you like, because Kubrick, shoots famously, even in this movie, he does it in other movies, mainly The Shining. He famously shoots in these long steady cam shots where you can very clearly lay out the cinemageography of a sequence, and you know where everything should be at. And so it makes it dreamlike once you start to lay it out in your head.
well, and that page also drew me to the similarities between this and The Shining, where The Shining is a movie where someone goes inside, right? Where this is a film where someone goes outside of their world in a way, if you want to
No, that's a good
perceive
I like
it that way. But of course, Kubrick being a filmmaker who his films are loaded with detail and filmmaking skill and all these things to make it like a puzzle. And to go way back to what Rehman was saying, like that scene with Nicole Kidman bearing her, emotion, this dream, is not puzzle-like at all. It's deeply emotional and deeply felt. So I think it tricks
it's
you.
Straightforward. It's very straightforward.
It's very straightforward. It's very like on the nose. There's not a lot of subtext to it. She's just telling you about a dream she had, and because they're high, you get away with this directness in a way that's dramatically interesting. and
unusual for Kubrick too.
And yes, it's a bit of a. I was reading a thing today about some controversy about Nancy Meyers and how Nancy Meyers in a lot of her films, people get drunk on wine and then express things. And this writer was not making that as a criticism. They were just like, this is a technique she uses, and there's nothing wrong with that compared to anything else that any other filmmaker does. But it is a trope of storytelling. An easy way to get people to like make mistakes is have them get drunk or get high, and that is what kicks off this whole movie. I mean, it's not high science. It's just like people getting fucked up. But the Room 237 view of Eyes Wide Shut was something I had never considered until this watch, and reading those things and thinking about how the film is physically constructed. And
yeah, same here.
And I'd like to just, and we can do this now, we can do it later, but the aspect ratio thing, I don't think I really knew about this.
What I mean? Okay, so
Shane's got to know.
Well, so. Kubrick's. It was a big. I still kept my DVD box set of this. Kubrick basically was making his movies in the age of VHS way before 16:9, obviously, and he would shoot a full 4:3 aspect ratio on all of his movies except 2001 and Spartacus. Okay. I think it's everything after The Killing, and besides Spartacus in 2001. And when you see it on video, you're cutting off the tops and the bottoms, but if you let those open, they're protected. Like I worked on a few years ago, I worked on this movie that shot scope, but it shot digital scope, and I was supposed to add the mat on after, and I wasn't told about this. So I worked for 3 days where like I was reframing shots because I kept seeing microphones in the shot, and I finally had the balls to like tell the directors, like, can you tell the DP you're getting the microphones in the shot? And that's when he told me we were shooting 235. Basically, it's most notable if you watch Dr. Strangelove, because what will happen is it's protected, but you'll still see a frame line at the top slightly. And Clockwork Orange is the same way too. And I remember working in a theater projectionist, knowing this because the box set didn't have Eyes Wide Shut, and all you had to do was take the aperture plate out, and you could see the full frame, or you could put the aperture plate back in, and what would happen is the light would then go over the masking, because that's the way old 35 projectors work before DCPs took over. And DCPs, like, it's completely different the way you do an aspect ratio in there. What was the reason you were bringing this up?
Well, two things. One, just an anecdote. I remember seeing A Beautiful Mind at my local multiplex and seeing a boom op in it, a boom microphone, and being like, "Whoa, what a mess!" And then years later, when I projected, I'm like, "Oh, that's just they didn't mat it.
That's just bad framing. That's bad framing."
But it was crazy that the actual film would have the thing on it. I was asking because
sometimes what will happen was they would mat it out on purpose and to make sure you have it, but for the most part, they just didn't. I mean, like scope. Whenever people shoot 235, what will happen is it'll shoot stretched, and so you get the full frame on it. So you just have a more pure image on it.
It's just a funny thing that used to happen in movies and projection. But what I was thinking is the nature of when Tom Cruise is walking in New York. And have you seen that? I'm sure you guys have seen the Kogonada video about the like horizon lines in Kubrick. About how
No, I haven't.
Oh, there's a wonderful Kogonada who made Columbus, but made a lot of great
Columbus, Indiana, represent.
Yeah, Columbus, Indiana. There you go. Yeah, right.
His criterion features are the best
they
ones
really
usually.
They are very good.
I think he's terrific. But he has a video about Kubrick's vanishing points, and I think the vanishing points are directly related to his use of the Academy ratio, which relates to how he shoots in this film. So throughout the movie, you can almost watch. I watched the Blu-ray that's in 1.85, or actually I think it's 1.66 or 1.7. It's in a unique ratio, and the edges are not as important. But if you were to watch the movie in 1.33, right now on FaceTime I'm in 1.33, so I'm looking at myself. The world feels much more compressed on Tom Cruise, and he's often center punched, and his conversations are often, side to side, like very simple compositions that feature like there's a scene in the morgue late in the movie where they pull out the body. And I remember watching the staging of that and thinking like, wow, there's this like information on the sides that is sort of interesting, but you don't need it. And then the way that the attendant, who's one of the few African-Americans in the film actually, pulls the body out and then like steps forward in the frame, and like Cruise looks at the body, and then I think it jumps the line. It's all very like, oh, this is really profound 1-3-3 compositions that are. It's this weird like old man thing. Like as you said, Kubrick was like shooting for video well past when he needed to do that. Like the future of home video is going to be watch it, in 4K scans.
I did a few weeks ago or a few months ago, actually, well, it would have been last year because it was pre-COVID. I did a radio show where I had to do it on my favorite directors, and I picked Kubrick, and I felt bad because I had this description of a Kubrick shot was going to be a symmetrical shot that had a vanishing point that was typically center punched. You think things like the opening shot of Clockwork Orange, or what else would there be? Like
the hallways, The Shining, like so much of The Shining. I think of that.
Yeah. Well, the vanishing points are so very clear on his compositions. One shot. Okay, I want before we move on to this, I want to ask you guys about one shot that like I noticed on the Blu-ray for the first time this last viewing. I'd never seen before. It's in the trailer. It's a shot of Tom Cruise walking down the street, and he slaps his hands in frustration. It's early on in his journey.
After he sees one of the recreations in his mind.
Is that a rear projection shot?
Yes, I read about this.
Okay.
Yes. I believe the shot there is definitely a rear projection in the movie.
Well, no, because most of the rear projection seems like it was the car scenes over the bridge and shit like that. But this shot is like a walking shot with that.
It's actually in that doc. It's in that site I sent you. They mention it in there, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's rear projection walking in New York shots, and I didn't catch it. I didn't catch it actually, and then until I saw that.
This is the first time. I mean, I've seen it on film, and this is the first time I noticed it. I want to mainly put this question to Kyle, but this goes to you, Rehman, too, as well. Is this there's an indie aesthetic of when all else fails with a low budget and art direction, put Christmas lights on a wall? Is this the birth of that? Like the whole art direction of this movie is just like random lights on walls.
There are Christmas lights everywhere in this movie, and in the green and red. I'm looking at my tree right now. We have like very specific. Actually, there's a whole thing. We got the wrong kinds of silver lights, so we have the right kind of silver lights. And my girlfriend's basically Jewish anyway, so it's all very funny. But it's everywhere, and I love that we're doing this movie for the week of Christmas because what a great.
This is our Christmas movie.
What a great holiday film. But I don't know if this is the genesis of that or not. I'd never really put that together. I always think of those like mumblecore movies being like, oh, we have no depth to the shot, like a shot of me in this room right now. Like, what if we just strung some lights here behind me? Now we created something rather than just a white wall and a WPA photograph, which I have there. So I don't know if this is the origins of that. I mean, that does speak to something though, which I don't know how much of an inspiration this movie is on people. I guess a lot of indie films and mumblecore movies and whatnot deal with like relationship issues, but they're never this, and I'm probably projecting here because of who Kubrick is and who the stars are, but they're never this mature or this loaded with celebrity, which is obviously a huge part of watching this movie.
Right.
Is knowing who this couple is as people.
When he was making the movie or writing the movie, he made a big deal about we were going to have a celebrity couple. One of the first ideas they had writing was at the time still married. It was Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger early on. But I mean, this is when he was writing. I'm sure throughout the years, like we're going to definitely go back into the old casting ideas later in the episode too. But
I mean, that's obviously a huge part of the movie. But if this movie is, if this is Hannah Takes the Stairs with Mark Duplass and Greta Gerwig, that's not in 2008. That's not going to play the same way.
This is the $60 million version of that.
Yeah, of Tom Cruise and Kim Basinger. So yeah, I would say that's a fun idea to maybe subliminally think of it as that. I just don't think of this movie as being as influential as it should be. But maybe watching it again, I mean, I was really like stunned by it. So I was like, wow, this should be a thing that's taught and that I should be watching every year, just to, like be up on it.
Is it that thing where like if this was any other filmmaker, it would have been their masterpiece, but because it's Kubrick's last movie, which is supposed to be the main last final message, and
and I think the stars heard it in some way. I think like it being like with the marketing and the Cruise Kidman narrative, and Tom Cruise is like 15 years after this, probably like kind of dropped it down a little bit. But now I think we have some distance from that, and it's of course great week to talk about Tom Cruise with his big blow up the other night.
Oh, you were going to bring that up. Cool, good on you.
Set.
Good on you, man. I mean, that was a fun blow up to listen to.
That was fun. But yeah, that's kind of Rehman, do you feel similarly like about the Christmas lights?
So, well, two things. One, I wanted to ask you. You said that the stars heard it, and did you mean did it hurt the film, or did it hurt the reception, or the way people what their expectation was going into it?
I think it's hurt. What I meant by that was I think it's hurt the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the fan reception in the years to come. I think when the movie came out, probably because of Kubrick's death and because of their fame, it was like a Tom Cruise. It was more. I mean, it made $20 million. It made a lot of money, and that's not because of Kubrick. That's because of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
There was a big deal at the time of like Kubrick clearly relied on star power to get his movies made, and he was a box like up until Full Metal Jacket, like and not counting Barry Lyndon, like he had a streak of box office hits too with these very esoteric movies. So
including and this makes its budget back close to it. I mean, not totally, but domestic it does quite well. So I meant like the I'm trying to think about. You think Tom Cruise in like 2005? He was the jumping on the couch era of him and the Scientology stuff. It was like I don't think anyone was taking him seriously at all, and I think his work is. I actually really like Tom Cruise in a lot of ways. I have problems with him too, but this film and consider he does this and Magnolia in the same. This is like 5 months before Magnolia comes out.
So I was going to bring this up. Are you guys familiar with the Paul Thomas Anderson on the set of Eyes Wide Shut story?
I am not.
No.
Are you, Rehman?
No.
I'm not. It's amazing. It's basically he, because Magnolia is going to be his next movie. Paul Thomas Anderson visits Kubrick on set, and Kubrick, is working this long period of time, 12 months, or I keep saying 12 months. I'm not sure that's the right amount of time. And Paul Thomas Anderson walks on, sees how small of a crew Kubrick's actually working with. And Anderson goes up to him and is like, do you normally work this small of a crew? And Kubrick turns to him and goes, well, how big is your crew usually? And Paul Thomas Anderson to this day says, like, I have never felt like such a bigger Hollywood asshole for that. Because of the idea of like every director fantasizes about, we know this, keeping their crew small as possible and like the minimal amount of people. And Kubrick's whole system worked in that he had the same people on payroll, but he had a very limited amount of people on payroll who knew what they were doing and that he knew were reliable to him. So like he could keep them going for months and months at a time, but he wasn't having a huge amount of crew work with them. That's why the movie was actually, even though it was expensive, was still affordable for that long of a schedule.
Over 400 days, yeah. So with the Christmas lights, that reminded me of something. I think like in my last watch through or not, I listened to a podcast. It was a film spotting, with Adam Kempenaar and Josh Larson, and they brought up the Christmas lights, and I think it was one of them had a theory about how they signified the facade in the world. I can't remember. This was he just brought this back because he's and I think they were talking about how the two models tell him that like, where are we going? It's like to the end of the rainbow. The place is called the costume.
Where
place
the rainbow ends.
Where the rainbow ends. Yeah, and
then the rainbow fashions is where they go.
Yeah, where they go. So there are like definitely like I remember him saying something, and this is maybe not helpful, but maybe the three of us can remember which scenes had this. But the scenes with the Christmas lights seem to be like. They're so prevalent that it almost gets absurd and it becomes unrealistic that like they represented the parts of the movie that were kind of the facade or like the mask that is eventually maybe taken down by the end of the movie. Even I don't know.
Well, when he goes to the Domino, the prostitute's apartment,
she has Christmas lights.
Well, I noticed it more on the second time when they go back after. Like do you remember in the first time Am I just wasn't paying attention the first time?
I think I remember the first time when they go into her bedroom. Remember things like, oh, she has Christmas lights in the bedroom.
But it may just simply be like they set dressed it by the entrance, and the staging of the second time they come back to the apartment just goes by the entrance there.
And then I do remember one thing he said, and I thought this was interesting. Before he comes in and he says, "I'll tell you everything." The last thing he does before he goes into his room, and I remember clearly,
turns off the Christmas lights.
Turns off the Christmas lights.
The Christmas tree. Excuse me. The Christmas tree.
Yeah. So I guess that's a very Kubrick thing where like all the Christmas lights aren't there by accident. They're sort of very much signifying some kind of thing, and he turns them off before he walks in. So that could be.
Okay, so are you guys also, speaking of other things, are you guys familiar of all the people that got film parts for this and got cut out because of the lengthy parts of this? Are you familiar with Harvey Keitel and Jennifer Jason Leigh?
Yeah, those are the only two I know.
I did not know either of those.
Jennifer Jason Leigh's fine. That makes sense. I don't understand why, because it's an isolated scene. But the one that weirds me out is Harvey Keitel could have been the star of Apocalypse Now and Eyes Wide Shut. And he's just like, nope.
He was Harvey Keitel was going to be Sidney Pollack's character, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Just for my own curiosity, since you guys work so closely with Terry, it's so interesting to watch a filmmaker who's so precise in Kubrick about the films, but is also benefiting from this sort of unchecked cachet with actors and financiers and budgets in some regard, and still being willing to cut them out, right? So it's like, so Terry for those films that we know made these sprawling movies with famous people.
Well, I think this is the only movie Kubrick did that with, and it was supposedly over schedule. It was just the fact that he was filming forever with these people, and they just couldn't keep filming because Kubrick is very much into this like film, come up with an idea, develop it, film again, and keep filming until we got a good idea. And, obviously with this long schedule, and some of these actors just couldn't live with the schedule. I mean, the other actor though, I forgotten about, and I forgot this is, he's not an actor. He's mainly known as director, but Todd Field, the piano player.
Well, I made a note.
Nightingale.
How funny that this film, like two of the first actors you meet are directors, Sidney Pollack and Todd Field.
I also had this perverse idea that the Sidney Pollack character in this is also the same character he is in Michael Clayton. They're both New York based, and he's going to orgies on the side.
On the Blu-ray I have, there's a feature, a very charming like late '90s feature that's very excited to use like multiple screens on time at the same like multi. It's very funny. Anyway, they interview everyone at the time of production. So they interview. It's after Kubrick has died, but they're interviewing Pollack and Kidman and Cruise and everyone. And Sidney Pollack talks about actually in a really interesting way how Kubrick was shooting his scenes, and he talks very much about Kubrick using technology and using video.
And showing it to the actors.
And showing it to the actors, exactly. So he's like, he's got this. The implied thing is, he shoots 65 takes or whatever, but he's like, we're doing multiple takes, and then he's shooting on video, not on film, and then we get to watch what we're doing, and he can make notes about our hand should go here and our hand should go there.
Yeah, I saw the same interview. I just was listening to an interview today with James Caan talking about being taught by Sidney Pollack in New York because he was one of the student teachers at the acting course he was at too.
Well, because Pollack is someone you think of as a much more actor's director, right? That's what's so interesting to have him.
He's definitely an actor who went to being a director, but went back and forth after a certain point, even though he became significantly a director. And he was always such a great Hollywood director. He was still making efficient, great movies that were studio system movies that worked. But
and I think he's a wonderful actor too. I mean, when he's in a movie, I always feel like a bit of comfort when he's around.
In the scene where when Tom Cruise goes back to Sidney Pollack's place and he's confronting him and talking about like, let's cut the bullshit or whatever. That scene, while I think the acting is great all around, that one was really strange to me because I could feel the act. Like you could see like the sort of almost traditional acting choices where like they're moving around the scene and like he comes up and grabs his glass, puts it here, takes his scotch glass, puts it here, and
I feel the blocking. You feel
all of that.
The script supervisor telling them where to put shit.
There's
and
a pool table.
How big the levels are on the drink they're drinking.
Well, there's a pool table in the middle of it. It's like the most like student film. I remember being in college and like we had access to a pool table. Like, let's set a scene around a pool table. It's the most like basic thing, but of course it feels great when you have Sidney Pollack and Tom Cruise, directed by
Stanley Kubrick.
So neither of you guys have read the Frederic Raphael memoir, Eyes Wide Open.
No.
Oh my God, this book is amazing. It's the screenwriter of Eyes Wide. I have the biggest love-hate relationship with this book because it came out like a few months after the release of the film, and I probably have read this book more times than I've seen the movie all the way from start to beginning, because it's Frederic Raphael. Frederic Raphael is an Oscar-winning screenwriter. He won for John Schlesinger's Darling, but he also wrote Two for the Road with Stanley Donen, and the movie he wrote that more notably in the last few years I think has come up is the Peter Bogdanovich Daisy Miller. But when I first read this book, I had no clue he was, except he co-wrote Eyes Wide Shut. And he's a European screenwriter, novelist who also does book reviews on the side. And the whole book is like done in different formats of his whole relationship with Kubrick. They've known each other vaguely through the years, but he gets a call randomly. And it's all about, he's like, I'm an Oscar-winning screenwriter. Kubrick's one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Why doesn't he think I'm his equal? And he just like spends the entire book going over it. And it's very like, it is one of the most pretentious things ever, where he's just constantly like dropping his erudite education, all he's the Latin he was reading at 9, and he keeps like the funniest is there's this
that's why Ovid's in there, I guess.
Yes, or it's like Fidelio is a Beethoven opera. Those references seem like they came from him. And the Michael Herr Kubrick bio that came out that was supposed to be the Eyes Wide Shut feature, because Kubrick was very protective about his press and wanted friends basically to write it so he could edit it. He has this really funny description of all this stuff where he talks about the book being very antagonistic. The phrase I loved, he goes, there's this unfortunate command of foreign words and phrases where he just keeps putting French and Latin into shit. But also there's Raphael describes Kubrick as a giant self-hating Jew, according to Michael Herr. I mean, and I'm making this book sound bad, but the thing of it is there's so many amazing stories that like he just keeps throwing aside. Like, have you guys ever heard the story about how Kubrick, according to this book, and Frederic Raphael, how Kubrick got fired off One Eye Jacks?
Didn't know he's on it.
So he was originally supposed to be the director on One Eye Jacks, or he was one of them, but he was one of the last ones. And so basically, according to Kubrick, by Raphael, they worked for 2 years, and finally, like Kubrick didn't realize that Brando really wanted to direct it, and so Brando had this like hotel suite and with a giant table. And he had all the department heads, and he basically put out a stopwatch, gave every department head 2 minutes to tell them their problems with the movie that they thought needed to be fixing. And Kubrick was last in line to talk. And so he went throughout the table, and everyone had 2 minutes, and after their 2 minutes, Brando would hit the stopwatch and say, "You're done." And Kubrick was like, "This is ridiculous." And Brando's like, "No, you have to do this." So he clicked the stopwatch. Kubrick started going through page 1, got like part of the way through page 2 when the stopwatch clicked, and Brando stopped him. And Kubrick turned to Brando and goes, "Why don't you go fuck yourself, Marlon?" And Brando just stands up, goes into the bedroom of the suite, and then doesn't open the door. And Kubrick's just like, well, he's going to open the door eventually. And he does it. And so everyone leaves, and that's how Kubrick finds out that he's fired from One Eye Jacks. Those are the type of stories that are in this book. Like, they're just like random asides. And the thing is, like, when I say read the book, I'm talking about I skimmed the book just because there's so much pretentious, like, there's so much like soul searching from Frederic Raphael, like, why doesn't Kubrick think I'm a genius like he is throughout this? And when I say that, that's a little clearer than the way he does, because it's just all this like last century boomer book editor from Europe talking about like it's pretty turgid stuff to get through too. But you just skip through it because there's all these stories in there.
You mentioned something that I wanted to touch on earlier, which not totally related to Eyes Wide Shut, but related to Kubrick larger, which is at the moment that this movie is being developed and going to release, I'm getting into like the internet and into IMDb.
Same here. I had this very strong memory of visiting my brother at Purdue, and the only time I had access to the computer, all I did was look up stuff on Eyes Wide Shut.
But the other film that we were all looking up at the time was AI. Because there was this rumor, this persistent rumor, that Kubrick was making a film with Joseph Mazzello, the star of the kid in Jurassic Park, what triggered this for me just now was the relationship between Kubrick and Spielberg, who's like the ultimate populist, filmmaker, but who I think is obviously a great filmmaker. And Kubrick and him had a shared an affinity for each other's work, but. So the rumor was Kubrick was developing a film called AI, and he was shooting with this kid, Joseph Mazzello, for like 30 years was the plan. And so they were supposedly shooting stuff, and then basically the Boyhood model of filmmaking. And then in the middle of that, this film Eyes Wide Shut's gonna get made, and then he dies, and that's it. And then of course Spielberg then makes AI. Yeah. Which I think is a great movie. But
I think mentioning this right now, I think we're going to have to do an episode on that movie because I love the shit out of that movie.
Yeah, I'd love to revisit that. I mean, my take on it is I don't think I've seen it since I saw it in theaters, but I remember being like, wow, this movie is so great. And then it has that coda. I remember not liking the coda. And I wrote something on Letterboxd about the coda, and a friend of mine who's a filmmaker was like, fuck you, the coda's the best part. So
I would argue you're missing the point if you don't take in the coda.
Yeah, it's been 20 years. It's
worth that's the movie that when I revisit every time is more profound every time I see it.
Really?
Yeah. I remember being lukewarm on it and watching it and wishing. I remember my big thought was like, I wish Kubrick had got to make it. So I should probably definitely watch it again.
Again, this is another episode. The whole thing that is from the grave, Kubrick knew that he needed a very emotionally manipulative way of telling the story, and he needed a folklore way of telling it. So that's why it was smart to pick Spielberg to do it, just because he knew all the things he could pull on the heartstrings to make certain elements of it work. But
every time I try to go back, and this is a complete aside, but every time I try to go back and I think about watching AI, I actually go back and watch Bicentennial Man. This is the truth.
We're all losing with that one.
Yeah, and that movie gets me like it puts tears in my eyes every time, and I cannot say why, but I'm like every few years I'm like, I think it's time for a good Bicentennial cry.
Shit. Am I overdue for a rewatch of Bicentennial Man?
I don't know.
By the way, not a bad idea for a duel
score, doesn't it?
You could bring us on, and we'll do Rehman do Bicentennial Man. I do AI. We get reactions. It'll be great.
Well, okay. AI is a good segue into the last few Kubrick movies, including AI, are so obsessed with Freud and Jung. And one of my big rewatches on this of like, I hate to be this guy, but like half of my research on what I know about Sigmund Freud or Carl Jung comes from what Kubrick said about it and telling me what to read. And this is one of the things that I've outgrown, I feel like, just because like Freud obviously in psychology doesn't mean shit to anybody. Jung still has a little bit of relevance, but just a lot of this ideas of human psychology, does this already feel dated slightly, especially human sexuality?
Eyes Wide Shut, the movie itself?
Yeah. Because the thing about AI I love is that it offsets the idea that, which I attribute to Freud, but it's not really Freud's idea, but this idea that sex is the biggest preoccupation of all human beings. In evolutionary terms, it definitely is. And what's interesting about AI is it offsets that. It's like if we create an AI and say you need to be obsessed with a mother just because, fairy tales are obsessed with moms, then this creature is going to be obsessed with the mother, and that's what's interesting about the whole movie because it builds the whole society off of an obsession with the mother and its creator. And this, I don't know, like obviously, I maybe the obsession in Eyes Wide Shut of sex and an institution needing to be made around that with marriage. Okay, going back to a point you made, or you both made earlier, mainly Rehman made. I have never seen this movie when I'm in a relationship. So I always look at this as a judgment on marriage far off in the horizon. And, you know, back in my 20s, I thought I was going to get married. Now I'm not sure anymore. So it always ends up, when I watch it again, it's a litmus test of what I think of marriage and the institution of it and how it can maintain itself throughout the years, whether it needs sexuality to keep it going, whether it needs commitment, or what exactly to keep it going.
Well, in terms of it feeling dated, I think, and Kyle said this earlier too, like the kind of the 8.5 thing, every few years you watch it, it becomes a different thing. So it's felt different to me each time. So in that way, it's never feels like it's approaching something in a way that's outdated, even in terms of views of sex, right? Like when I was younger, the parts about the sexuality were bigger, just because like it was just more of a it was more of a part of my, like, I guess I was in high school and then in college, so there was just a bigger part of my brain. But now I watch it, it was kind of just more of the connection between the peoples, and I think like I think the movie's more about like facades now, more so to me this time than the actual the kind of like if the marriage needs like sexual sex to achieve. I think it's about losing facades, and like I think her line where she says, "Now we're awake," right? Kind of says that like they drop the sort of like he believed that he wasn't really.
This is where the marriage is really at this point. This is like we're not all sleeping.
And he's like he didn't believe he could be jealous. He's like, I'm not jealous. And one story he can't stop it changes like it completely changes him, right? He's like he's such a Tom Cruise at the beginning and a completely different person at the end. And so I think it's to me it's very much about that. And I think like just maybe whatever it is they need, and for them I think it is sex plays a big role, and I think that's why at the end she's like there's one very important thing we need to do, and then that's fuck.
Such a great inline. One story that came up I was thinking of in terms of the expectations of sexuality, which I want to, as we're winding down, I have a few more things I want to talk about, but one thing I want to talk about along those lines, I was thinking of this Kevin Smith story that he tells about Spielberg and Lucas, where, and again, this is a Kevin Smith story, so this is 5 degrees of separation, and he was stoned telling this in front of a college audience. But he told this story about Ben Affleck spending a Thanksgiving with Spielberg a few years ago with Lucas coming over, and they ended up hanging out on the internet. This was like late 90s. They hung out on the internet, and Smith tells a story about basically them giggling over looking up lingerie ads on the internet, and that was the height of pornography for them. And there's something about if you come at this movie with my 1999 expectation that Kubrick's going to make the ultimate porno, and this is what the movie is, even though I did want to bring this up, Kyle, when you mentioned the CGI creatures, Roger Ebert described the silhouettes in front of the orgy scene as Austin Power silhouettes. You remember the opening Austin Power?
Yeah. He's like, he's blocking it. Yeah.
That was the controversy at the time, and that is the thing we don't have to think about anymore, even though I'm just brought it up.
Well, I have a very specific thought about the nudity in this movie, which I'm trying to like phrase this correct. Not really. That's not an issue, but it's like there's a scene in the orgy where all the women are in a circle, right? They're in robes, and they take their robes off. And they're all masked, but they are all then nude, and they all have the exact same body type. Their breasts are the exact same perkiness.
I always assumed that was a Kubrick thing because, like, it's also the models that were in Clockwork Orange or the naked lady in Shining too.
It totally is what it is, and it's one of those choices that I think when you're like 15 and horny, you're like, whoa, naked women, and then you're like 37 and you're like, whoa, this is kind of eerie. Like this is I'm seeing this is actually goes to the dreamscape. I thought I mentioned this earlier, of like there is one body type that maybe Tom Cruise's character cares about, or that, and because we are privileged to see Nicole Kidman naked earlier in the film, this is definitely not her body on these women, and they are all cast exactly the same. They are faceless, and then they are being sort of a version of raped or taken advantage of by wealthier men. And I found it like deeply unsexy and not at all tittillating, despite the women being like objectively beautiful, shaped women. And that was another way to use the 5-year thing, that things have changed for me in the 20 years since this film came out. Because I think at the time I was like, whoa, check it out.
One thing I noticed in my last night's viewing, especially because it was the first time I had seen the non-silhouette version, was from a modern standpoint, I have to say, where is the male gaze in this movie? And obviously it's all women naked. Mm-hmm. There was one gay guy couple
when they're dancing.
That was no. I was talking about the orgy.
Yeah. It's when they're kind of like slow dancing in that ballroom kind of thing, and one of the guys is naked.
Were they dancing, or were they doing like a fake motion that's supposed to simulate something else?
No, I remember one where there's kind of like that dance scene, and one of the guys is naked, and he's kind of covered by the guy who's clothed in the hood.
Okay.
I missed this no matter what, by the way. So wait, is that during the orgy? During the one
I saw is during the orgy.
I guess the ritual is the better
one you're saying is too. They're kind of dancing. One's naked and one's.
Yeah.
Maybe we are talking about the same one, and I'm just making a crude reference on it.
There's the one where there's a lot of guys, and they're kind of like the music is. They're kind of. It feels like they're like kind of slow dancing or something, and I think it's after maybe he's being called to. No, I distinctly remember because like the guy is naked, but he's like well covered because they're close to one another.
But did you see the version you saw had silhouettes in it?
No silhouettes.
Kyle, maybe this is the thing that it was just is the thing that gets revealed whenever the silhouettes disappear.
Yeah, it made my Warner Brothers. Although
it was the first time I saw it.
I'm pretty sure my Warner's Blu-ray was not silhouetted. But whatever, it's this moment that we both missed. Probably for whatever jokey reasons we want to make. But are you standing out for you for what reason? For like how it's not necessarily the male gaze, or for
yes, because I had those same thoughts for the first time watching it, similar to you, where they all were the same body type, and this was probably the first time I noticed like this is the Kubrick body type, right? This is the one you're always seeing. And it was also second to this was the first time this is probably the most terrifying that scene has been for me, right? Before it was always
same here, yeah.
It was like very cool. Yeah. Like I think the most terrifying shot in all of Kubrick's movies is those two people turning their heads looking down at him. That like it gave me goosebumps. Like it's
the zoom, right? It zooms in.
Yeah,
which,
and then
if we're talking about the same one, that is Leon Vitali in the Mask.
In the Mask with
yeah, he plays like two different parts. He's also the speaking part and the you have the wrong password.
Yeah, so like that, but it was scary, and it stood out to me because I think it was right where my eye was resting from the previous shot.
Well, it's a good composition, center punch composition. I wanted to bring up, you both also, I keep bringing up books that you haven't read. Eyes Wide Open is a fun book you guys should just check out. This one I'm not recommending you guys to read, but it's Terry Southern's book, Blue Movie, which is, Kubrick had this tradition of working with screenwriters and great writers. He worked with a lot of novelists, and Blue Movie follows this thing where both Anthony Burgess, who wrote Clockwork Orange, wrote a Napoleon novel for Kubrick to adapt that he never adapted. And when Kubrick was supposedly thinking about doing this high class porn in the early 70s, Terry Southern wrote a book in theory for Kubrick to do, but what's weird about it is it's about a director named Boris Arian, who's based on Kubrick, making the biggest budget X-rated movie of all time. And like, I read this book finally. Pauline Kael's a big fan of the book. I read it finally 2 years ago. I happened to read it right at the height of the Me Too revelations happening. And so I started to attribute a lot of reality onto Kubrick that I just retroactively after the fact don't think is there. Like, okay, back to Eyes Wide Open real briefly. There's a story they tell in there of Terry Southern and Kubrick writing Doctor Strangelove together in the same office at Shepperton Studios. And there's an actress that kept passing them by that was really attractive that would ignore them. And Terry Southern decided to write her a love letter, and all it said was, "Come to our room for good head." That's
Love
the
letter.
kind of, yeah, exactly. That's the kind of immaturity and sexuality that it comes throughout a lot of Terry Southern's books and comes throughout this. But like, there's like, you know, a dwarf having sex with somebody or something like that. That's the kind of jokes that go throughout this movie. And that being said, this book is pretty fun because it's like, when I read it, I really thought this was how Kubrick created art out of, like, there's this description in the book of he gets a screenwriter named Tony Sander, also with the initials TS, and they write the script over 3 days on B12 injections. It just feels really late 60s, early 70s. And supposedly for years, whenever people would hear about Eyes Wide Shut, this was the movie that Kubrick was supposed to do. And this is what I know I thought I was expecting whenever I saw Eyes Wide Shut, and obviously didn't happen.
When was the book written? What year?
70 or 71. Is your 70 71?
Well, I mean, Kubrick wanted to make this movie Eyes Wide Shut for a long time, right? Like, it's something from when he was much younger, right?
Yeah, he got the rights in the 70s. I was also going to ask you, can you guys imagine Steve Martin? Because that was who he originally wanted to play this role.
Well, also, I read this, just actually one of the few things I read before the podcast, that Woody Allen was his choice in the 70s.
I had heard that too. Well, I mean, both. Can you imagine both these? Because to me, that version of the movie got made in 1985 with Scorsese in After Hours.
Yes, actually, someone I follow on Letterboxd wrote, "What if they made After Hours but not funny?" That's Eyes Wide Shut. So that was really, really a great. That's why Letterboxd exists. But all those actors, I think they're all, first of all, great actors, and I think that the way this film plays on celebrity, and the way it capitalized on this particular celebrity, referring to both Kidman and Cruise, is a big chunk of the movie, because you are even watching it now, I'm like, man, those two were married. They had kids together.
So is this like picking comedians to have them do a humorless performance?
Well, I think I do think both these actors are underrated, even still. Maybe Nicole Kidman is now properly rated, but
I was saying, like, if you got Steve Martin or Woody Allen to do this,
yeah, right. Like, yeah, would they have been? I think both those guys have, well, certainly Woody Allen have a darkness to them
Sure.
that could be. You know, the thing with Tom Cruise is there's not much to him. Sorry, I'm now speculating on Tom Cruise's life, but it's like there's very little to Tom Cruise that's interesting, right? Like, he's a movie. Like, what's interesting about him is that he's just movie star. He is our.
Yeah, but he had his best. He had, like, my favorite performance of it was right after this, and it reflects positively on Eyes Wide Shut too. But Magnolia, the rage inside him, the sexuality, really is played well.
Well, and this is why I thought this outburst on the Mission Impossible 7 set was so interesting, because I listened to that and I was like, whoa, he is being Frank T.J. Mackey. He is being it's like,
respect the COVID. Tame the vaccine.
When I have trouble respect the COVID. So that was really good. I have trouble accepting Tom Cruise as a person outside of the roles he plays because of the nature of his fame.
One of the things about Magnolia, he's been one of those actors I've always been helpful to designate between actors who are character actors and leading star actors, and Magnolia was like they managed to synthesize what he was able to do to make him a character actor for one movie. But he's a guy who has really pushed himself to be an amazing lead actor.
And in Magnolia, he's playing a star, and he's doing that thing where he's a star in another movie. It's just he gets his 40 minutes of screen time in Magnolia.
I am quietly judging you.
I don't know about I don't know about Steve Martin as well, but I think like the trajectory of this character feels like it would be so natural for Woody Allen. Like I feel like this is what he would do in his own movie. Where I think it was the most interesting to see someone like the sort of, I don't know, charisma or the idea of Tom Cruise.
Well, there's also the fact that Woody Allen was such a sex star in the 70s too.
Yeah,
and he won over Diane Keaton.
Yeah, but like in this at this point, like there's, I guess like the fact that it's Tom Cruise in the role feels like the movie knows it's Tom Cruise in the role in some ways. Right?
Yeah.
With like,
or the movie kind of develops itself knowing that it's Tom Cruise.
Yeah, because like the way he starts off, like especially at the party, and even
smiles.
Yeah, smiles, or even like you feel him in a couple of areas. Especially, I think I felt him most when he's like the prostitute's roommate, when he's like kind of putting the moves on her. You feel it there as well.
Oh yeah, well the level of smiles and the silent, he responds to the silence with a laughter and a smile, and it's a movie star reaction to it. It's like every actor, when all else fails, smile.
Yeah,
like it's always their default. Yeah,
and to watch that guy get broken down this way, I think would be pretty different than I think watching Steve Martin and especially Woody Allen. But I do think there's always something maybe very true and exciting about comedians in serious roles. Like I think that really does work well, right? But I really think like I think he did a great job in the movie, but the fact that it was Tom Cruise and that fact hasn't really changed up to now. Tom Cruise is still kind of Tom Cruise, very similar to the way he was at that time. Now there's more depth to him.
There's always been the speculation that he's going to move over to his Paul Newman roles, like older Paul Newman roles, and it hasn't happened yet.
No, he's still
Steve Martin. It's okay. Go ahead.
Like, wasn't he like delaying Mission Impossible 2, like while he was waiting for Eyes Wide Shut to finish? Like they kept pushing it back. Yeah. Well, Mission Impossibles are still going on, so like I think like I can't like you still kind of see him as that character, and I mean I think that adds so much to it. Yeah.
Honestly, it adds to how desirable he is. Like for all the women he meets, you're like, well, why wouldn't you have sex with Tom Cruise? Mm-hmm. It's Tom Cruise. Mm-hmm. But you're also like, well, there's Nicole Kidman back at the house, and she's, Nicole Kidman. Like there's
even though
like your brain's doing a lot of
back at the house. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot that plays into a modern audience watching this movie. That I think is intentional.
No. I was the one thing I would say about Steve Martin that doesn't play. I don't think he ever had a dramatic role that played out like this, because whenever he plays dramatic roles, he always plays it flat. I think his literary career is the only thing that shows this level of gravitas, but like his acting career never. I'm not to say that he couldn't have delivered a good performance or Kubrick could have gotten one from him, but it seems like the literary performance. Kyle, I know we're low on your time, so we need to get you going. One more question. This is a weird last question to ask, but are you guys familiar with the conspiracy theory on the internet that the Illuminati killed Kubrick because he revealed how their orgies played out?
Vaguely, not specifically.
Kyle is laughing at least.
I am not aware of that, but I am weirdly aware of the Illuminati on the internet. So I did not know that this was a plan. Please go on.
No, I think I wanted to discuss this because I think there's so much data out there that points to this not being the case, but I would love it if it really were the case. It would be, but I don't know. It just doesn't make sense where he completed a movie and it still got released by a giant conglomerate owned by, at the time, AOL, I think. But let's kill him 2 months before it gets released and before he can finish looping.
Did he die of did he have a heart attack or was it?
Yeah. One of my big evidence I just looked over was there's a book that came out. I want to say it's actually a few years now. It's like 4 or 5 years ago. But his driver, Emilio de Alessandro. There's also a great documentary based on the book. I think it's on Netflix. There's a description of the days around Kubrick's death, and Emilio, he was the only one hanging around Kubrick's house while basically Kubrick had sent his editor. I mentioned earlier he'd sent him the editor to show the print to Nicole Kidman, Tom Cruise, and the studio executives. And this book's great detail of like Kubrick's notes that he would leave around the house and stuff like that to all the people working with him. But it just details like the last few days he was weak and cognitively not there. And then one day, Jan Harlan calls Emilio and just like, I'm sorry, Stanley died. It just doesn't fit the narrative. Like if he got poisoned by the Illuminati, it would have had to be a multi-day poisoning. On top of the fact that like all the stuff in Eyes Wide Open with Frederic Raphael, he would have had to been on it too.
Yeah.
Well, okay. There's this one funny story in Eyes Wide Open that does go towards this, where, Frederic Raphael is a novelist who can come up with a lot of interesting stuff, and so they're trying to figure out some background information. Kubrick's wants him to write some more stuff, and as a lark, Raphael writes this fake FBI dossier about orgies that JFK had attended, and the thing in the book is there's all these transcripts of phone calls between him and Kubrick. And he has a transcript of the phone call where Kubrick calls and is like, where did you get this? And Raphael's like, I made this up. He's like, no, but seriously, where did you get this? Because I need to know where you got this from. And Raphael keeps trying to explain to him, like, this is a fake thing that I made up. And Kubrick is actually spooked and paranoid about this dossier, supposedly.
That's maybe the Illuminati was going to kill the movie, but Kubrick said that I will redeem the movie, and it went from there.
The movie's too good for the Illuminati to kill.
Well, because that's what the woman does in the movie. I will redeem him. Or
Stop! I will redeem him.
My girlfriend who grew up in the Upper West Side, she made a comment during the movie like this mansion they're at. Well, it has to be on Long Island, and she made a comment, and I was thinking this. She's like this. I was thinking, oh, this is a Great Gatsby thing. Like this mansion where this orgy is happening is a North Egg Great Gatsby thing.
There's a green light in the orgy.
Right, yeah. She's like, there's
orgiastic green light.
But like no one, she's not wrong. She's like, no one's going to Long Island. It's a long way away. like I don't care how late it is. You're not going to Long Island for an orgy. I want to bring up a point, and maybe Shane was here, but about a decade ago, LACMA here in Los Angeles did a Kubrick exhibit.
I wasn't here. I missed it. I wanted to see this so badly. I didn't see this.
It was an extraordinary exhibit, and some personal history. I worked closely on an exhibit about Alfred Hitchcock. That was I was involved with the college, and my mentor in college kind of developed it, and it was sort of about demystifying the auteur. So the idea that Hitchcock is a great filmmaker, and his films carry his voice, but he was a great collaborator, and his production designers, costume designers, cinematographers, editors, actors, all of them were huge parts of why those films are so great. And this Kubrick thing was a little less focused on that attitude. It still had the Kubrick as genius, but the thing that struck out to me was there was a series, and I have pictures, which I obviously can't share over a podcast, but they had script pages out that were annotated by Kubrick. And Kubrick always collaborated. I'm not sure, and Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, were any of his films written and directed by Stanley Kubrick purely, not based on source material or co-written with somebody?
No, not a single one. Because I want to say Killer's Kiss is the closest. He was credited as a writer-director on both Barry Lyndon and Clockwork Orange.
But both are based on pre-existing IP. If we want to use the modern terminology.
Clockwork Orange is I can't wait for that Clockwork Orange sequel where they finally have the actual last chapter in it. Yeah.
I just watched something interesting about Kubrick. He was someone who, despite his confidence as a filmmaker, his skills as a filmmaker, he lacks some amount of originality in terms of like he needed the bones of story to work within. And that's true
to his credit, he always made the point that he wanted, after a certain point in his career, he only wanted to adapt stories that he could tell, that he could reassess and figure out what works and doesn't work on. He was very clear on that.
That's a fascinating. Actually, to know that that's a fascinating point to make. That you're like
he only wanted to adapt other books for a while, although it wasn't necessarily just books.
But instead of coming with fascination on form.
Sure. I mean, I know part of the reason I've always been obsessed with him is his formalism. I mean, like, structure's such a big deal. The endings being such a big part is always so thing that drew me to him very early on.
Yeah.
But I also feel like in the film nerd game that we all traffic in, it's like the writer-director who originates the story and who sees it through, and that's not Kubrick. Like he is someone.
To be fair, that is definitely not Kubrick.
He's interpreting things, and he's maybe the best ever at doing that. I mean, Scorsese is not a huge writer-director. He's also excellent at interpreting other people's material. But almost as a rule, Kubrick needed co-writers. He needed
I think in the last few years, I've given him credit for being a better collaborator than I initially gave him to. For someone who's known as auteur genius, a singular perfectionist, he still needed people around him, and he needed his writers around him.
And that was a big part of the exhibit. That was, if I remember, the best part of the exhibit was like page notes from The Shining, and notes about the novel, notes about the screenplay. I forget who this collaborator was in that screenplay. It was a woman, wasn't it? It was
Diane Johnson.
She wrote Les Divorce. Yeah, that
wrote Les Divorce. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that was in theory supposed to be my last question, but the one question was, I did have actually one more final question. So Kubrick famously cut a shit ton of stuff after 2001 and The Shining, and he died before he was able to do the mix on this. If he had survived, what do you think would have gotten cut from this movie, from Eyes Wide Shut?
Like what scenes would have been cut?
Yeah. Well, have you guys ever seen the difference between the American and the European versions of The Shining?
No.
It's 20 minutes, and there's very little notable things. It's just the European version is 20 minutes shorter, but just slightly faster. And there's some different, there's a half a scene cut here and there, but for the most part, it's just literally scenes in faster.
That's so interesting because I tend to watch movies that like this summer I watched the New World 3-hour version, the 172 minute, which I'd never seen. And I was like, what do you take out of this movie? Like what take you remove from this? Of course, I've seen the 130 minute and the 150 minute versions already. So it's interesting to say, what do you remove and not notice? I love that question.
It's a big question because, I mean, a lot of what ends up happening with The Shining is it's a pace thing. Like there's a much more deliberate rhythm in the American version, the longer American version. So
this movie has a deliberate rhythm too. It's very hypnotic.
Exactly.
And even in the speech, it is at times so incredibly slow, like intentionally. This
didn't come up on the Refn episode, but I did want to talk about the repetition, the thing of by the way, it's nice to see you, Kyle, and you say back to me, is it nice to see me? And I say, it's nice to see you, Kyle. It's the rule of threes on dialogue where you repeat it three. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way they speak or move, especially in the orgy scene, is just. I think it's probably pretty deliberate. I thought about that as I was watching, and I couldn't think. I probably wouldn't take anything specifically out because the movie, to me, is it's a bunch of sort of these vignettes, specifically this episode happens, like Odysseus's episodes, right? This episode happens, this episode happens, this episode happens, and he kind of revisits them all in the second half. And the meaning of the film is what you take in it is just how you fit those episodes together, right?
I think the closest I had was after the orgy. I was thinking the repercussions of him investigating stuff, but even then, it all felt essential. And even the repetitions, they were all done in single shots. There wasn't a shot reverse shot where you can cut them out.
Could you lift the entire domino sequence? Could you lift him going to her apartment? I'm doing a little bit of edit. These editors are both, no one can see this, but both these guys are looking in the distance what?
I think you could. I think you could because I've always attributed the domino sequence with the newspaper headline he has afterwards was "Lucky to be alive," And when one of my friends first started presenting to me like, oh, you know this is a dream, and that was the evidence they gave me, was like, he could have gotten HIV, but he's lucky to be alive, as opposed to the guy that's following him that might be killing him.
Yeah.
Which was what was really apparent last night. I don't know. I think, yeah, you might be.
I mean, I think you could, and you probably wouldn't feel it, but I think it's hard to tell without watching it, without those scenes, what it would feel like, right? Because there's something about going back, and I do love that he's so Tom Cruise-y in that, and how that's continuously going to be.
Yeah, I think your description of it earlier was good. There's also the fact that like he's willing to get his jollies off from whatever options he has, whether it's going to be a prostitute he finds on the street or going to an orgy. The Russian father pimping out Lelio Sobieski, like that part is something that's from the novel that I'm wondering actually that should have, like, I still don't entirely understand, except this idea of if is it just supposed to be all forms of sex that is supposed to be appealing to him? Like, could he have any kind of like model sex, underage sex, or like?
Well, and to be clear, I think the film's better the way it is, but like as a story, could it work without that character, the Domino character, and could it work without the Lily Sobieski pimping and then the weird coda to that? Which honestly, that was one of the most confounding moments I found rewatching the movie, was when those two men emerge.
When I've heard about what was cut from 2001, it seems pretty obvious. When I hear about what's cut from The Shining, I'm not entirely sure. Like, that makes a huge difference.
Do you know what I would cut that has nothing to do with time?
Sure.
Is all his visions of his wife having sex with that man.
I had that vibe too. You get that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, there's a certain vibe with Kubrick of overkill. Like you just like, did you get this shot? Well, here's another version of that shot. Let's do it again.
When it's such a dated, like it's like this weird strobe effect. And,
well, the frame rate is a thing that Kubrick has never done something like that before.
Yeah,
and it's like black and white, blue tinted.
Yeah,
it's like, and well, the thing with the reason those scenes actually kind of those are probably like the thing I like the least about the movie by far, and is when I think about Eyes Wide Shut, and this probably wasn't the case when I first watched it, but over the other two, when I think about or thought about it over the years before I watched it again this time, it wasn't the orgy scene that came to mind. It was my favorite part about the movie were the zooms in the taxi, where you see his face. And before I watched it this time, I didn't remember the cutaways. And I was like, those moments were the best to me, because it was just like this. The movie is full of subtext, and here's this moment where you have to read how you're putting it together onto his face, the sort of flatness, sort of kind of intense Kubrick stare. But those zooms in the cab, I was just like, I remember before I watched it, I was very excited to see those again, and I remember being disappointed because it kept showing.
He cut away with the authorial intent and shows you what he's thinking. What did you think? Speaking of authorial intent, what did you think? One shot that really was cool to me was the shot when he came back to the apartment, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and Nicole Kidman was teaching their daughter math problems, and there was a zoom in on both of them, and it was such an innocuous zoom on both sides, besides the the audio overlaying with the dream, her describing the dream. Is that the same cheap level of what's happening in the cab, or does that work?
Well, I think that's better than cutting away to the other thing. I think the zoom is nice because he's kind of seeing them.
Well, there's also the smile too. There's like the fact that like they're smiling at each other while he's showing what he's actually thinking.
Yeah, no, I actually very much like that moment, because it doesn't really. It does tell you what he's thinking about, and they do cut away, but the sort of like
it still works on different levels.
It still works on a different level, and the sort of layering of it, you're trying to figure out what they both are thinking. And also, if there's, I am a huge fan of zooms, like just the biggest maybe fan of zooms. I think they're like very uniquely cinematic in a way, and you can use them terribly.
Are you an Altman fan?
I haven't seen so much Altman that I could say I'm a fan.
Oh, Rehman,
but
you're going to be on for some more Altman episodes. That I'm going to make you watch some Altman movies.
Raymond, I have a big Altman library we're going to share when we hang out soon.
Don't worry. You guys live close to each other.
Maybe that'll be the impetus. But like I just love because it feels so uniquely cinematic. I'm sure there's analogues and other things, but just the sort of the field of view warping part of it. And and it's not like every moment has to be a zoom, but when it's like just kind of used right, it really gives me goosebumps. Yeah, it gives me goosebumps.
God bless the 70s. I guess to wind down, do you guys have any final thoughts?
I think I covered most of what I wanted to say. I mean, I was my notes were to talk about the naked women, the New York that this film is not, and then sort of the offhanded feel of it when it's definitely a constructed, deeply felt movie. I guess my thing is in the Kubrick films, I'm now wondering if this is my favorite one of his movies. Like I honestly, that's
really
kind of
before we rewatch this, where was this at?
He's just like who I think things shift for me a little bit. I always love Paths of Glory. I've always liked 2001. I've always liked Clockwork Orange. I've liked The Shining. So it's some shuffling of those movies. But I now feel like the things we talked about earlier about the emotional content in the movie, about it feeling looser and yet still being constructed. I don't know. If you asked me to watch any one of those movies tonight, like at 10 p.m. LA time, I think I'd probably pick Eyes Wide Shut. Even though I just watched it on 2 nights ago. So I was, I don't know. There's a lot about Kubrick that I don't know, and that's a shame. It's obviously lovely to hear you talk about him because, it's similar to you and I talk about Mike Leigh. It's like I feel like there's these filmmakers who I know, but I don't know really everything about them. And Kubrick is so rich. But
Kubrick's also just so poured over. And there's people like there's some people we'd worked with and myself who are just obsessive about every fucking story available about him. And I mean, there's probably versions of it where they're not worth pouring over some of these stories, but.
And like I don't have room in my brain for these. Like I saw Room 237, I thought it was so interesting, but I was like, I can't engage with The Shining. Like I have to live a life,
Well, there's also just the vibe of like, it's one thing to think of him as the omnipotent perfectionist, but let's be fucking realistic with each other about this,
Yeah. But he's a good enough filmmaker that question exists. And so when you watch Eyes Wide Shut and you're like, wow, that shot, that reverse doesn't match to the other one. Is that an intentional thing or is that just like an off day? Or do they shoot that 200 days apart?
Or more, he leaves it in on purpose.
Yeah, he jumps the line a number of times in this movie. Am I just, because it's Kubrick and not like some college kid, am I giving it a pass? But I really like in a very real way. I think this is my right now my favorite one of his films, and I'll also say it's the last one I watched. So I watched this a few years ago. I had not seen a Kubrick movie in a couple of years. I rewatched this to talk about tonight, and it stuck with me. So that's it. I loved it.
I always think of Kubrick favorites in terms of Coen favorites, and I think there's a few other filmmakers I'm probably blanking on where it's just like it literally is the last movie you watch. It's going to be your favorite. Rehman, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah. One of the I feel very similar to Kyle. I kind of I didn't think it was one of the lesser ones, but it was kind of just the ones that like, oh yeah, if it's a Kubrick movie, it's good, I'll watch it. But then watching it this time was by far my best viewing, and I don't know where I would place it, but it probably is in like the top of them for me. And I think the part of it was the sort of emotional content of it, and this just a sort of like, I don't know, it really felt kind of human, and I was actually very surprised by how I thought it kind of had a positive message at. Like more than like
you seem to be indicating that was your interpretation of it.
Yeah, I think it was like I mean, I think in the basest way in the end it's like just saying like, yeah, relationships are hard, you got to make it work. It's just like but that's like the basest way, but no, it's like, yeah, it's like, there's but it just kind of like the dropping of the facade and kind of like intimacy that was involved in it that I think was missing. And like, but the same thing you said, Kyle, it's still very much a Kubrick movie. Like you see things in it, and you'll know. Like if you had never seen this movie and watched all of other Kubrick's movies, I think you would instantly be able to tell after you watch it that it was him. But
definitely.
Yeah. And one other thing that I think also kind of makes it more interesting to me is like, I didn't know before I watched it, I heard that he wanted to make this since he was a kid, or not kid, but younger. And like, it's something that's maybe been ruminating in his mind. And and then the last movie he makes has this sort of positive feeling to me, is like that is like a very nice sort of outside the movie kind of experience for me. It made me think of like, like Beethoven wanted to make for the Ninth Symphony Ode to Joy since he was a kid, or since he was very young, and he was known to be like this curmudgeon at an end. But the Ninth Symphony's message is about unity, and all people are like together, and like this sort. And it's not to that level, but that sort of like kind of arc that I can not very accurately, but kind of put onto Kubrick, it makes me like the movie more. I don't know why, but
I see that. My last point I want to make, when I saw this movie, my gateway to a lot of film obsession, Kubrick was a big part of it. He was my big filmmaker in high school. In my freshman year, I tried to find it for tonight, but I couldn't. I wrote my English term paper on Kubrick, and I went so far over the page limit because I had so much to write about it that I got an F on it and had to rewrite it based on a completely different writer. I ended up writing on Alan Moore, who, by the way, his book Lost Girls with his wife Melinda Gebbie is a much better example of making artistic porn. But anyway, but the thing is that when I had to do the class presentation, one of the first things I ever edited that I thought was awesome and did get a good effect was I edited a Kubrick montage. And it was funny because I started editing on VCR to VCR, and I literally what happened was it went so long that I ended up just using the intro for class, but it still had some cool shots. It had like the shot of it had the shot in Full Metal Jacket where they're all doing the push-ups while Private Pile's eating the donut. I think it was all done under the song of "We'll Meet Again" and ended with the nuclear explosions. And one of the things over the years as I've watched Kubrick, I don't know if it's a commentary on him or what I thought as a teenager, where like it was a very superficial idea of like human nature being negative. And it's interesting to hear your interpretation of that, Rehman, just because, like, I think I agree with you. And I think there's more dimensions to Kubrick, because everyone who watches Kubrick, every time, without fail, from the lowliest film person seen for the first time to Scorsese to Spielberg, all these people watching always say, every time we watch it, we get a new dimension. And I think your interpretation's right. There's, or at the very least, something more to watch for next time I watch it. There's something more positive in his movies. I mean, there's the Spielberg interpretation, which I mentioned earlier on Paths of Glory. Like his wife singing a song to these soldiers is the ultimate thing to go out on.
Yeah, and that one's more very traditionally sort of emotional and positive. And I actually was curious. You said Paths of Glory is usually up there. How much of like is it partially because of the way it ends, or is it just in general like? Kyle.
It's generally just because you can isolate it as the one time where like he has a little bit of sentimentality or like a little just like relenting of like without being funny about something, because a lot of the way he relieves tensions is humor. And so I don't know, it's Kubrick. Like he still to this day 40 years into watching movies, and like he's still my favorite, man. He's still my favorite.
He was very much one of my early kind of bringing me into movies thing, and through Clockwork Orange. So yeah, although I've definitely revisited him a lot less than I probably should.
So we'll have you guys back on for the AI and Clockwork Orange episode too. So
don't forget the Bicentennial
the AI Bicentennial Man episode.
It's not AI only. We have to address both turn of the century robot movies. Chris Columbus, Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
We're there.
I want to thank you guys both for being on this. You guys are obviously going to come back, so whatever. I don't have to bug you about it. You guys will be back.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it
great.
really felt like one of the days of Dog and Duck or something.
That's the whole point, man. That's the whole point. Thank you both for being on the podcast. Cool.
Great. Thanks, Shane. Appreciate it, as always.